learn how to paint this beautiful Christmas themed poinsettia painting. It's a tutorial specifically for beginners. I'm Rebecca Jarman and I'll see you tomorrow. Hi, so I'll go through the materials that we're going to use for this painting today. I've got a couple of brushes, both round, so they've got a nice tip to them. I've got a number 2 and a 4. Also, you'll need a pencil for drawing your flowers. What I've done this time is I've provided a drawing for you. If I just show you here, it's actually my original drawing, which I've photocopied, and I'll provide it in PDF format so that you can download that if you want to, and then trace it onto your watercolour paper. So I've drawn 3 poinsettias in my image here. You're also going to need watercolour paper. I've used some masking tape to tape it down to my board to keep things nice and flat while I'm painting. I have 2 pots of water, one to clean my brush and 1 clean pot of water for mixing colours. The colours we're going to use today are alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue, and these are the colours that I've mixed to create my painting. So we have the alizarin crimson for the flowers. We have 2 different greens that I've mixed, and I'll show you how to do that, both using cadmium yellow and French ultramarine blue, and then we're going to use a little bit of the cadmium yellow for the centre of the flowers as well. It's always good to swatch your colours first so that you know how they're going to turn out on the page. So if I just set myself up here, so you'll want a bit of kitchen paper towel as well, just to clean your brushes. And I'll start by mixing colours. So you can see on my palette I already have my crimson ready to go. I have, this is where I was swatching out my greens, so if I just wipe that off there, and I'll show you how to mix 2 different greens. So I've got a couple of spots of water on my palette, and I'm going to take, first of all, the cadmium yellow down here. And obviously this is for creating the foliage on our picture. So this is going to be the lighter green, so plenty of the yellow in there, and then straight into the ultramarine blue, pick up some of that, and a little bit of that creates a nice pale kind of apple green, which is perfect. It's quite a fluid mixture, there's a lot of paint there, we might not need to use quite so much. And for the darker green that we're mixing, we're going to start with the blue. So picking up the ultramarine there into the water. So if you're using solid paints like me, you just need to activate them with a little bit of water first, and then you can pick them up from your palette and mix them there. So there's my ultramarine blue, and then because it's a dark green we're mixing, we only want a small amount of yellow to create a darker shade of green. Always remember to clean your brush in between times so that you don't dirty these clean colours. And there we have a slightly darker green. So we've got all 3 colours mixed here, and we're ready to carry on with the painting. Okay, so if you trace the image onto your watercolour paper, I've done it quite darkly. You can clearly see that on camera. If I were to do it just for myself without recording it, then I would actually put down a lot less pencil so that you can't see the lines once you've painted it. So I'm just going to take my putty rubber, which I didn't get out. So this is a putty rubber. It's great for taking kind of graphite from the paper without making smudges. I'm just going to lighten my lines a little bit by just rubbing across the surface. Just so that it's not so visible once I do my painting. There we go. So it's not quite so clear now for you guys on camera, but I can see that fine. So what I haven't done, you'll notice, is I haven't drawn any leaves or foliage on there or berries. What I'm going to do is begin by painting the petals of the flowers, and then add the leaves where I'd like them once I've got the flowers in position. So I've not got a definite idea of where I'm going to paint those at the moment. So I'm going to take my number 2 brush, just wet with clean water, and pick up some of that crimson that I've got already mixed on my palette. And I'm going to start off by painting the inner petals of the flower using the tip of my paintbrush where there's the nice point, so that you can get into all those little areas. So the firmer you press onto your paper, the wider the mark you create. So that's a nice fat line. If you put little pressure on, you can create nice thin lines. So that's how you control the amount of paint that goes onto the page. So I'm going to, notice I haven't wet the paper or anything like that. I'm simply filling in the petals from the tip, well, from one end to the other. And if you paint quite quickly, you won't get any hard, dry marks on there. Keep reapplying the paint as you need to. And just going to, while those are still slightly damp, pop down some more paint towards the centre of the flower, just to darken that area a little bit, and carry on moving around that flower. In exactly the same way, being careful at the point. These are really pretty flowers to paint, very Christmassy, so perfect for Christmas cards. So I'm being careful not to get any of the crimson paint in the centre of the flower. Okay, I'm just going to add, dabbing my brush just allows some of that paint to puddle in the middle around the centre. And so we'll end up, when it's dry, with lighter tips and slightly darker in the centre, and it just gives it some dimension to the flower. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mix up a slightly paler crimson colour over here in my palette. So this is a little bit more water than paint. And now I'm going to go to the outer petals. There's a little bit too much paint on my brush there, it's puddling, so I just touch the paintbrush onto the paper towel and it takes some of that paint away and stops me from applying too much in one go and getting in a mess. So if you find that your paint's puddling, just touch the tip of your brush onto some paper towel and then you can control the amount that comes from your brush. Obviously the smaller the brush you use, the less paint it holds. So if you're finding it a little bit tricky, if you're having a lot of puddles appear where you don't want them, then you might want to switch to a slightly smaller brush. That's the tip as well. So I'm just going to go around the flower in the same way, painting these outer petals with that thinner wash of pink. And I'm just going to take a little bit more of that pink and just allow it again to puddle at the bottom in between the other two petals, just so that we've got effectively sort of like a shadow. Starts to look much more three-dimensional then. If we wanted to, we could apply another layer of paint. Once it's dry, if it's not quite dark enough in that area, we could go again and create what we call a glaze effect and paint another layer of the same paint over the top, and it will produce a slightly darker pink. And I'm going to continue around, just going to turn the page around, making it easier for myself to apply the paint. to do exactly the same thing again. Just pick up a little bit more paint, dot it down the centre here, let it just spread into that petal. And the final one. Drag the paint all the way down. Now we have an overlap here, so just be careful where you apply the paint. The other flower in the front, the smaller flower, is actually in front of this flower, so we've got a slight overlap there. And again, I'm just going to take a little bit of darker paint, dab it in the centre. Let's darken these up a little bit, go into the thicker crimson and pop some thicker paint down, and let that just bleed. We call it bleeding, and it just bleeds into the damp paper, and you get these beautiful effects. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is let that dry and carry on in exactly the same way with the other two flowers, and I'll speed up the video so that you can see how I do that. So I've allowed that to dry, and now we can come back in and look at the centres, and also starting to add a little bit of detail to the flowers as well. So I'm going to take my small number 2 round brush that's damp, and I'm going to pick up some cadmium yellow, and you want to pick up a good amount of paint, so a little bit of water with a lot of paint will create a much more vibrant yellow, as you can see here. So if your yellow is looking pale, it means you need to add more paint and less water. So I'm taking it straight from the palette there and just painting it directly in the centre. Okay. You'll also find that because you're using thicker paint now, that it's a little bit more opaque and you won't see the paper through it, which is absolutely fine. Just what we want. So cleaning off my brush, now I'm going to look at adding some details to these poinsettia flowers, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use opaque crimson. So damp clean brush, still my number 2, the finer brush, your smallest round will be perfect for this. So again, just a little bit of water and straight into the paint there, and you can see there's a nice tip on this brush, and I'm going to add some details to the petals by drawing a line from the centre, following the curve, if you can imagine the curve of the flower, just drawing in some lines to accentuate their shape. And then I'm going to just add a bit of water just to thin the paint down a little, and do the same with the other flowers. So you don't have to go all the way to the tip, you can vary your lines a little. And again, I'm going to turn my piece round just to make it easier to paint. I find dragging the paintbrush towards me gives me a little more control. But you'll find a way yourself, whichever way you prefer to paint. So I've created some lines there on the central petals. Now I'm going to create slightly paler lines by adding more water to that pink, because obviously these petals are a little bit paler. And I'm just going to draw in a few lines here and there. Like I say, you don't have to go right to the tip. It just gives a little bit of definition to the shape. Looks a little bit more three-dimensional rather than flat. Okay, and that's our petals and our flowers done. Clean off the brush. Now we're going to look at adding some greenery around it, so some leaves. And these types of leaves are quite easy to paint. I'm going to stick with my small brush to begin with in the darker mix, using, obviously we created this earlier on, we used the French ultramarine blue and also cadmium yellow. Much more blue in this one than there is yellow, so it creates this darker green. And I'm just going to have a look at my picture and decide where I'd like some of these leaves. And I'm just going to draw some in initially. So I've drawn the outline with the brush, and now I'm going to fill that in with the paint. Okay. And now I'm going to take off some of that paint and I'm going to go into clean water, and I'm going to drag some of that green down to the end of the leaf. So we've got some variation again now. So we've got the leaf is darker at the centre, and as it comes down it gets lighter. Like that. Just stops the leaf from being too flat. I'm going to have another one, I think, here. Exactly the same again, so the darker green towards the centre of the plant, drawing a line towards the tip, removing some of that paint and just going in with some water and dragging that paint down, just to give us some variation. And just dab in some more of that green here while it's damp. There we go. Dab in a bit more on that one too. Okay, so these leaves start to look a little bit more interesting. So now I've done a couple of the darker leaves, I'm going to do a couple of lighter leaves as well. Exactly the same technique. I'm going to draw the shape first, and this is going to be quite loose, this painting, and drag that down, and then maybe another one coming in around here or something. And this time, clean off my brush, and I'm going to go back into the darker green with not too much on my brush, so I'm going to take a little bit off on the paper towel, then I'm going to draw in down the centre, and maybe a couple of veins coming off as well. Okay, so taking a little bit off my brush, and because the paint is still wet on the leaf, this darker green splays out, so you get this nice texture created. Okay, so I'm going to continue going around the painting, doing exactly the same thing, filling in some of these gaps. Again, I'll speed up the painting so this video doesn't become too long and a bit boring for you. Okay, so now as you can see I've done quite a few leaves there. I'm just going to mix my dark green with a little bit more blue just to darken it up some more, and I'm going to come in and create some shadows where we have overlaps of leaves and petals and things like that, just to especially in between, in the centre here, this is all should all be very dark, just to add that depth. So just go in, and we call this glazing now, so we're adding an extra layer of paint just to deepen the effect, and it's great for this kind of thing, for adding shadows to a painting, just here and there. It starts to stand out a little bit more now, and just continue until you're happy with the amount of shadows you've got. I mean, I'm trying to be quite loose here as well, not too controlled. I mean, if you're after something very, very tight, very detailed, then just take a little bit more care. But I quite like a loose effect, and so I tend to speed up if I want something a little bit less controlled. Just a bit of speed will create a sort of a looseness to your work. And I think we're almost there with those now. Just a bit of extra depth here, and possibly down here too. Just there, I think. Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to leave those as they are, allow that to dry fully. Now the other thing I want to do is to just bring in a few sort of dotty berries and things like that. So we could pick up the crimson. Let's just reactivate this darker crimson a little bit along here. You can also just go straight into paint. And just adding in some, where shall we go? Let's have a look. Let's pop in a couple. If you leave a little bit of white on your berries as well for highlights. Again, I'm not going to be too particular about these. Just leaving a little bit of white on it to catch the light. So let's do a few more down here. I quite like this down this area. You can bring in some foliage just to join these up if you like. Let's just get one that overlaps a little. Okay. Yeah, that's nice, and maybe have a couple more just to balance it out across on this left hand side. Let's see, let's have a couple, let's have one here and maybe another one here. Odd numbers are best really. So there's 3 there, 2, 4, 6, 7 there. That's perfect. Just add another one on here to make that an odd number as well. Yeah, so let's think about joining these to the main plants. How are we going to do that? Let's quickly mix up a brown. So what we can do is take some of the crimson and mix it in with the lighter green. And that gives us this brown colour. So at the moment it's quite orange. Let's make that a little darker. Let's pick up this green here. See if we can get a darker brown going on. More crimson. Whoops, whoa, that's a lot of crimson. So now we've got red, which is fine. We can sort this out. Okay, so you can see that we've now got a sort of a red brown. And I can clean off my brush. Just go into the ultramarine blue. Mix that in with some of this brown, and we've got a really nice dark brown there now. So if I just show you that, so we've got a darker brown. Okay, so just using the tip of my brush, and I'm just going to pop some little sort of twiggy kind of shapes. Just to represent the fact that there's something else in this bunch with the poinsettia. So we've got a few twigs going on, and the same up here. Branches of holly or kind of some kind of winter berries. Okay, maybe let's put a couple of branches in down here. Bring some of that just to give the picture some balance. Some kind of winter twigs, branches. Can do the same up here as well. it's looking a bit more wintry when you've got something in there without any leaves, so that's quite nice. And then finally, I think just to finish off, let's have a little bit of splatter. We always like a bit of splatter, and I'm thinking green actually, because let's get a bit more texture in on the green. We might do green and red, let's see how it goes. So I need to get as much on my brush as I can. I'm using my small brush, this might not work folks, but it is, that's fine. Sometimes you need a slightly bigger brush so you can get more paint on your bristles. If you really load it up and really go to town with tapping it hard, then you'll find it does come off your brush and onto the paper. Sometimes this can be a bit tricky as to work out where it's going to go. If you tap down, generally speaking, it will come down in this direction. Let's have finally a little bit of the crimson as well. So pick up some crimson, plenty of paint on the brush. Whoops, I've got a hair on there as well. Let's get rid of that. Again, tap down. It doesn't want to come off. So there's a couple of reasons why it might not come off your brush. One, if the paint's too thick, it doesn't want to go anywhere and lets you touch it to the paper. If you're not tapping hard enough, it won't come off. So there's a couple of reasons why it might not be working for you. Just try a few different techniques out. I really like that, that's lovely. Let's get some more up here where we've got the berries in this corner. Okay, that's lovely. Nice. Let's see. Let's bring back some of that light green as well. Quickly mix up. Remember we started off with a nice light green, didn't we, on some of those leaves? So that was just with the cadmium yellow and a little bit of the ultramarine blue. Let's pick some of that up. And you get this paler green. There we go. It's sort of what I call an apple green. Let's get some of that paler colour on here. That's nice. Okay, lovely. The other thing you can do is you can make sure your brush is nice and clean, go into clean water, and actually if you dab down some clean water around some of these spots, it will bleed into, the paint will bleed into that, and you'll get these nice random lighter patches of paint. So here we're going for a bit more texture, folks. See that we've got nice pink there now. We've got some different shades of green going on. I'm liking this, this is good. Let's get some pink up in this corner. So I'm just touching some of those dots of paint which we popped down. Same here, we've got a mix of pink and green going on here, so that's really pretty. And it's just the water really doing this. So that's nice, so now we've got some kind of random effects happening, which is really nice. Obviously it might not be for everybody. You may want to stop before you do the splatter, that's absolutely fine as well. But I quite like experimenting a little bit and making things look different. Looking back at the painting actually, I've just noticed that these white areas for me at all. We need some shadows in there, so I'm just going to go into my dark green. There's not a lot of it left, just adding some water to that. I'm just going to take my brush and I'm going to fill in those light areas, because what's happening is it's catching my eye, and that's not what we want to focus on. We want to focus on the flowers. So by filling in those light areas, we don't get distracted by that lightness. There we go, does that look better? I'm just looking from a slight distance. Yeah, I think that is better. Great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry thoroughly and have a look at it in half an hour to an hour or so. Remove the tape and see what I think. Okay, so as you can see here, I've allowed the painting to dry. I'm quite happy with all the expressive marks that we've got around the edges of the piece. But you can see here that I have used a felt pen to draw around the petals to define the poinsettia petals flowers more. I've used a non-permanent felt tipped pen to do this. It's quite a fine one, but I simply drew around. I've not been too careful actually, as you can see. I've purposefully not been very neat with it, just to give it another element of texture if you like, but it's very easy to do. You can do the same. You could use a ballpoint pen if you don't have an ink pen, that would work just as well. Or alternatively a black pencil or something like that. You can define the edges that way. I just thought that the red of the flowers wasn't standing out quite enough for my liking, so therefore I thought the outline here would work really well. I don't often do this, but I think in this circumstance it's done the trick. So I'm simply going to remove the masking tape now for you, if I can get the edges. So just to show you, pull the masking tape away from your picture. Always pull it away, because if the paper does happen to tear, you won't tear into your work and spoil your painting. So we always stick, or I always stick, my paper down to a piece of card or a drawing board, just to keep things nice and tight as we're painting, because you'll find that the paper wants to buckle when you add the water and the paint to the page. So therefore always use at least a 140 pound or 300 gram paper. That helps to prevent buckling, but also stick it down to a board and you shouldn't have any issues then. Goodness, I've stuck this down very well. So just removing that tape and the board. Okay, there we go. So we've got our lovely poinsettia picture. There's lots of nice texture around the outside, and I really like the twigs actually. That adds an extra element of fun, and also the berries there as well. I really hope you've enjoyed painting with me today. I've found it nice and fun. If you'd like to see more videos, then like this particular video and press subscribe, and each time I upload a video you'll be notified if you tap on the bell icon on my YouTube channel. Okay, take care guys, see you again soon with another watercolour tutorial.